My conversation today is with dedicated Freemason, host of the Mystic Tye podcast, and host and organizer of the 2024 Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference, Troy Spreeuw. Brother Troy and I sat down to talk about his start in Masonry and broader interests in Western esotericism. His studies of the 19th and 20th century agent provocateur Aleister Crowley, the Masonic atmosphere of 2024, and the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference, which he is organizing and hosting in Seattle, Washington, September 27th and 28th of this year, now in its 8th year, and much more. Troy's commitment to the fraternity and those of us with a foot in the world of esotericism and the broader occult has been a laudable and frontier pursuit. His combination of intellect and affability make for engaging and enjoyable conversation. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. Brother Troy Spreeuw here on the Arcanum Podcast. It's excellent to have you. I'm very excited. You know, we only recently met. That's kind of been a theme for me. I'm meeting a lot of new people lately, particularly through Freemasonry, of which you're a very active member.
Indeed.
And you're going to be hosting is this the 8th year of the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference in Seattle, Washington?
That's correct. We've moved it around in previous years, but the last few years we've held it at Occidental Lodge in, I believe it's Ballard. Is it Ballard or Edmonds? It's Occidental Lodge in Ballard, Washington, which is just north of Seattle. It's part of North Seattle area.
Great.
My organizing partner, Ken Lane, and I have been putting this together. We did a couple of years during the pandemic, but we've brought it back in person. This will be our third year in person. And we've expanded it from a single day to an entire weekend. And we've been bringing in speakers. Last year it was PD Danny Newman came to talk about Angels in Vermilion and his new book, Theurgy. I think we were the first ones to get a talk on his new book, Theurgy. And this year, for the dates, were 27th, 28th, 29th of September. So the same weekend we've been doing it on for many years now. And this year, our keynote will be none other than Ike Baker.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. You guys have done something really successful, and I was hanging out with Jamie actually just a few days before he went to Jamie Lamb to the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference last year in September, late September, and Danny's a friend as well, and we were kind of talking back and forth, and they're like, "Are you going?" And I was like, God damn, I was like, I'm so jealous that you guys are going to this thing. So it's great that you, I really appreciate you asking me to come on. What's the impetus behind it? What keeps you putting this thing together? As you mentioned, we're not really people who organize conferences. It's a thankless job. We're not getting any real kind of remuneration. So what excites you about this project enough for you to keep it going for 8 years?
Well, it's not the money. Let me tell you that. And anybody who's organized events like this, I mean, there's ways to make money doing it, but really, at the risk, it doesn't even get close to proper remuneration for anybody. So it's not the business aspects of it. There are business aspects of it, but it's mostly to create a space for like-minded Freemasons. And people interested not just in esotericism, but in a premium experience in the lodge, and not just for the candidate, but for the other members that are participating in the ritual as well. And for people interested in Freemasonry, but for one or another reason can't join or won't join, but they're interested in, say, the academic study of it, or they're women and they can't join our regular lodges. We've had women Freemasons attending for a couple of years, and I couldn't believe how controversial that was, considering United Grand Lodge of England has had them at at public events, for years and years. Anyway, the impetus is really to create a space where we could talk about the various aspects of esotericism in Freemasonry. And for me, from an academic standpoint, all of Freemasonry is wholly esoteric. Now, that doesn't mean that everything Freemasons do is esotericism, but the nature of our specialized knowledge that's exclusive for a certain group, that you have to be initiated to join. When you look at the definition of esotericism, Western esotericism, Freemasonry does check all the boxes. And yet, when you talk to many academic esotericists or academics interested in esotericism that aren't Freemasons, lots of them will say, well, I don't know very much about Freemasonry. And it's like, well, I think you know more than you're letting on. But it is the kind of thing that, guys, well, why Freemasonry? And I will say to people, I can't tell you, I can show you, if you're a man and asked to join, I could show you what Freemasonry is. But Ken Lane and I have, we've put together this little community. We get, 80 to 120 guys, depending on the year. And of course, we'd like more attendance. I'd like more people to come, and people think, well, I'm not that interested in this type of material, but there's always something for somebody, whether it's, we've had studies of different types of astrology and different types of tarot and different Kabbalah practices and different Hermetic principles and different philosophical viewpoints. And we've had speakers, the wide variety of speakers. We've had artists and occultists. We had Lon Duquette remotely a couple of years ago. We've had Jamie Paul Lamb, and we've had lots of local brothers present. And it does provide an environment where a local brother with some sort of esoteric interest. One of the guys came up from Portland last year who was a Buddhist monk for much of his adult life, and now is a professional astrologer. So he and Jamie Paul Lamb clearly had a lot to talk about. Anyway, that's what we're doing at EFC, and we'd appreciate people coming along. We're certain that you'll find something of note and interest, even if it's just tangential to your personal practice. There's always something going on at EFC that's worth a look.
Yeah, it's super important. I think now we're kind of experiencing this wave in terms of, I guess you would call them like these Masonic extracurriculars, where there's podcasts, there's conferences and things like that. And I really admire the work that you've done in pioneering an esoteric conference, because many Masons may know, but other people that will listen to this podcast sort of outside of the fraternity, but in the broader occult communities, are not aware that it's not necessarily like a popular thing throughout the craft. And so I'm curious, you must have a lot of interest, but is there any kind of like blowback or any kind of pushback on something like this from the local Masonic communities, or is it mostly copacetic?
Well, it's funny you should say that. Like, I personally have experienced some blowback about, being openly interested in occultism in Freemasonic circles. And it's kind of mystifying to me, because when you look back at the giants of Freemasonry, many of them were, not just into some esoteric stuff. These guys were like practicing occultists. And I don't just mean that in the term occult means hidden. I mean, like, these are people interested in traffic with familiar spirits and ceremonial magic and these sorts of things. So much so that all of the revival of that in the 20th century, in the late 19th century, that we saw all came out of Freemasonry. And when you look back, the tarot, which is probably the most visible symbol set of esotericism, at all. At every step of its development, there's Freemasons there, guiding it along. And so Freemasonry, the larger idea of Freemasonry is this deistic, a school of thought where we can have the rational ideas of the Enlightenment and science with a religious flavor that doesn't allow for anybody to say, well, my invisible friend says this and you have to do X. And so we're getting together and removing the old tribalisms that get in the way. And so, when I talk about the clearly esoteric influences that put the craft together and that we practice on a regular basis, and if you get in concordant bodies, are kind of like the cornerstone of the concordant bodies, I get pushback, but I think I get pushback from guys that are into it in their concordant bodies, and they think they've got something special that should never have been put out in public, and I think for SRIA or SRICF, some folks that thought that the Golden Dawn initiating Crowley and then Crowley and Regardie rending the veil and it all being made public, that's all just a crying shame. But I'm sorry, that horse has left the barn, and there's nothing so secret in there. Like Crowley would complain, you do all this work, you attain to these heights, and they teach you the Hebrew alphabet. And to me, it's all so silly. I understand the value of secrecy in one sense, but on the other hand, keeping this stuff so hidden just creates the wrong kind of stigma. So you ask if there's been blowback. There has been. I've experienced some personal blowback. Would that ever slow me down or stop me? Maybe it should have. It hasn't yet. And so many Masons, so many craft Masons are looking to expand their personal practice. As the old ideas of religion and spirituality are changing with our access to technology and information, people should be encouraged to join our group work and take the initiations, because perhaps having more guidance would keep people from going so crazy with this stuff, from going so far down the rabbit hole. They get a little nuts. And it is, as I've heard you mention before, it can be a bit psychologically dangerous. But a Freemason's Lodge is a good place for a guy, at least at this point, a guy to find other guys that are open-minded enough to talk about this stuff, and they can put, they could kind of put his feet on the right path and try and keep him from going a bit crazy, when it comes to going down the esoteric rabbit hole. Now, at the conference itself, we've had a past Grand Master attending for the last few years in Washington State, and he really enjoys it. There has been a bit of blowback, but nothing serious, like no organized politics within the grand jurisdictions that we participate in. We haven't had any really formal pushback, no cease and desist letters, no stop talking about Freemasonry, this isn't Freemasonry. And so we just continue forward with the people who are interested. And if you're not interested in this sort of stuff, then don't come along. And I should note, we've also all the way along been open to the public. Not all of the stuff discussions are open, but most of the event is open. The entertainment portion's always been open, and the meditation session's been open. But of course, some of the years there's degrees conferred, and those aren't open. This is a tiled lodge, so there's no women, and and there's no outsiders. Last year they conferred a Master Mason degree again, and it was of an excellent quality, and it's a good opportunity for Masons who travel to see some work done. Now, I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. We keep changing the way the conference is set up every year. It's a little different, and we learn each year, what's working and what's not. And so yeah, we've, this year we're excited to have you. and I don't expect there will be too much, pushback other than the usual. Well, you shouldn't be talking about, or this should be for the concordant bodies or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it, and especially that it's quite a commitment to the fraternity to offer something like this, as I kind of mentioned before. So I'm curious, how'd you get started in Masonry? Like, did you? I understand that you have also a ceremonial background and things of that nature. Were they sort of happening at the same time, or did one kind of burgeon out of the other?
Yeah, I don't know how far back I should go. In the 90s, for a couple of years in my hometown of Powell River, my wife and I owned a bookstore, and it had been sort of a new agey bookstore. It was called The Next Page. We bought it and ran it for a few years before we moved to the city, and it had an esotericism section in it. And we wound it up and moved to the city, to Vancouver, about 2000. And in winding it up, we sent a lot of the books back, but some of the stuff had gotten old. And there was a copy of Rigardi's The Golden Dawn and Rigardi's The Garden of Pomegranates. And I ended up reading those, and it was interesting. And then I was in the Visions bookstore, which I only live a few blocks from now in New Westminster. But I would say about 2001, 2002, I was in the Visions bookstore here, and I saw a copy of The Book of Lies, Crowley's Book of Lies. And I was like, well, that's an interesting title. And I like to style myself as a controversial figure, right? That would say I was one of those young jerks that would say things to get a reaction out of people. And I enjoyed listening to the Rush Limbaugh show. And now you would call a young man like that a troll. But back then, I didn't know any other trolls. That was just me being me. I'd like to say controversial things to get a rise out of people. And Crowley was like the ultimate rise out of people. So I started reading this Book of Lies. I read it in the bathroom. I don't know if you've ever read Book of Lies, but it's a book of Kabbalistic poetry, and there's a lot of tongue in cheek, and there's a lot of references to popular culture from 100 years ago that make no sense. And it's clearly there's a lot that Crowley is driving at that's completely mystifies just a surface reading. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy on about? Anyway, so I got a copy of the Book of the Law. I started reading some more of this material. And then I find out that there's a society that Crowley had left behind as magical order that was still functioning in some areas here. I was in Seattle at a cult bookshop there. And I asked the owners, like, hey, I hear there's a Gnostic Mass going on. Do you know how I would find out information? He's like, oh, you should ask that lady over there. She was one of the priestess at the local Gnostic Mass temple. And so that day at the Queen Anne Masonic Lodge, I got to see a non-Masonic event. But it sort of got me started. So we're talking like 2004, 2005. So I joined that order a number of years. And I enjoyed it, but I found the ritual proficiency wasn't necessarily what I was looking for. And I had started a bit of my own personal practice at this time, and I'd met a number of people. And so in 2008, I joined the craft here, the Duke of Connaught Lodge, and was master in 2012, 2013. And so I joined the craft looking to collect the degrees and see kind of the mother of all current esoteric or magical lodges, because I knew that the Golden Dawn and OTO and everything else had come out of Masonry, some of the weird Masonry during the 18th and 19th centuries. And so, but then I didn't expect to fall in love with it. I didn't expect that the men I would meet would be my brothers with a capital B. Like, I didn't expect this. I grew up in a big family in a small town, and now I'm in a big city where I can be anonymous, which is exactly how I wanted to be. But then I had this whole group of guys that, it loved me for me, even though they hardly knew me, and would accept what I was willing to offer. And I had some skill at being able to memorize and recite ritual and perform initiations, but that came later. They just welcomed me in, and I'm getting ready for my entered apprentice. I'm getting ready to knock 3 times on the door, it's as we would say. And there's a part there where I had to take my wedding ring off for practical reasons. And I'm looking around to put it somewhere safe. And the brother I was standing there with just says to me, he's just like, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that here. Just put it down." I get goosebumps still talking about that.
Yeah.
Now, there are lots of temples in the jurisdiction where you wouldn't want to leave valuable stuff in the anteroom necessarily, but at this particular temple, second floor, that building's gone now. It was destroyed by an arson fire. But you know, yeah, but I just remember this level of trust kind of coming into my body, and just this experience of complete trust, and a good thing, because an initiation is not it's a physical event, right? And if you don't trust the guys that are doing it, it might even be dangerous, I would expect. But yeah, that's how I got involved in the craft. And in the 5 years run up to my installation in the East, I didn't really talk about my interest in esotericism, not as much. I was involved in the organization of Grand Masonic Day because one of the other guys here, who's now passed on, who was running the event, recognized that, here's somebody we can get to do stuff. And so he kind of looped me and some other guys in. We're still running Grand Masonic Day. It's this annual education event. And he had me present fairly early on. And I was talking about some esoteric principles. I gave a talk on the book of Thomas Stanley's Pythagoras, with the foreword by J. Daniel Gunther, I think. Anyway, so, I'm talking about some esoteric stuff, but I wasn't really openly outed myself. And then when my lodge installed me in the East, I asked if we could use, Crowley's Book of the Law, as I styled myself a Thelemite at the time, and it probably still would. And yeah, nobody in the lodge had a problem with it. So I took my obligations on a Book of the Law, and not once did anybody seem to have a problem with it. Now, I don't have a problem with any volume of sacred law. So, I don't insist that when the lodge is open and I'm in the East, that my book be on the altar. I'm not that particular. But if I ask, I get the impression that from the guys in my lodge, they would absolutely be like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. We'll put that up there for you." And same with the lodges I travel to. I've never really had any blowback on that. Now, there are jurisdictions, I understand, where that could be a problem, and that I'm not willing to sacrifice Pax Templi just to have my book on the altar. I don't need it. I'm not that particular about it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, it does interest me. Crowley's a very controversial figure, and I've got my own opinions about Crowley and his lineages. I think
shocking.
well, here's the thing. The thing is that my thing about
I haven't met somebody involved in the Golden Dawn who didn't. Like,
look,
you get a love or hate him, you gotta have an opinion.
Well, here's the thing, right? I think he was intellectually and poetically brilliant. And I don't really go out of my way to say that very often, but it's the truth. A lot of people that don't like Crowley haven't read Crowley.
Yeah.
A lot of people that don't like Crowley don't know anything about Crowley. They kind of get it's a moralistic thing. My issues with Crowley don't stem from any kind of morality. They stem more from the fact that the inversion of the magical formula of the Golden Dawn in his own order. But the thing that I love about talking to you in all of our talks is that like this is, even you saying that you're not willing to risk Pax Templi to have your book on the altar. It's like it's becoming increasingly rare that we are able to talk to people that we have, fundamental disagreements with, and still meet on the level, as we would say in Freemasonry, because I have the utmost respect for you, and which is why you're here. Right? I don't really invite people on that I don't have respect for. But I'm very interested to that you're it seems like your interest in Crowley has kind of refined itself and grown, and it's just as nuanced and mature as you would hope that someone would be after whatever it's been, 20 years of of following and studying him. And I watched something that I watched your piece on superiority on Crowley and Freemasonry. And it was one of the most shocking things. And I only found out very recently in some research I was doing that Crowley was actually not initiated as a regular Mason.
Never got the opportunity. Thought he had.
Wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, here's the thing. I mean, if Martin Starr's book, The Unknown God, was re-released recently, and Martin hasn't talked publicly for years and years and years. And I got a chance to meet him last year, and then he told me this was coming out again. And then in The Unknown God, uh, Starr really shows Crowley at his spiritual genius and at his terrible cult leader genius as well. Like he treated people so badly, and just is like, and we've all known uber maguses that behave so badly, and I just don't see a need when all of this is ultimately so subjective anyway. Not that I don't think there's some objective reality to it. I do. It's like Spreeuw would have said, neither. There's this idea that it's both and neither, objective truth, and these spirits have an objective reality, and they're completely subjective, just made up by my mind. It's both. People are like, how can you have both? Well, tough luck. It's both. But because it is so subjective, why would I waste a second trying to convince somebody who's already fully convinced? We have enough problems down here in Malkuth to solve without getting any further ahead. And I think so much damage historically has been done because of people are absolutely convinced of something that is completely subjective. It makes me want to grab people and like shake them until they realize I'm just not a violent guy. But it does make me like, especially, and nobody is more convinced than a new student of anything.
Yeah.
And again, maybe I'm not fully over the asshole I was as a teenager, but I'd like to think that as my hair has gotten less red, my temper has lowered itself to the point where I can now see people's difficulty with me personally, and with the material I might have presented and the types of beliefs I might have espoused at one time. I've just mellowed out, and not only that, like I take my work very seriously, and I take the work of my lodge very seriously, and the orders I'm involved in take them very seriously. But I wouldn't take myself too seriously. I find that often people who are interested in leadership, and even if it's just thought leadership, but putting forward ideas that they want to have treated as the ideas of this particular silo or that particular silo, those are the wrong kind of people oftentimes, that they should not be leading anything. And so, would I say so? Would I go out of my way to tear somebody down? No, I'm just not interested in those sorts of arguments on a completely subjective belief structure. I will give people a good example, and I will be as tolerant as I can be. And I know people who know me personally might be like, but you're so rash. You've got such a brash character and attitude. And that is true, but it still is. I am doing my damnedest to moderate myself now,
Well, a part of that is quite admirable, because I don't think that my personal experience is that, when I was, again, right, when I was a newbie, when I was starting out, I kind of had this vision of spirituality as like, tabla rasa, like
Mhm.
it just no personality, nothing, just completely like unleavened bread or something, like the wallpaper. And I thought that that was, kind of the goal of spiritual pursuit. But the more I work within the Western tradition, and the more people that I've met that embody these characteristics that we're talking about, which is essentially, part and parcel, at least, of the beginning stages of adepthood. Um, you know, treating people well, and being able to converse with others, and exchange with them, and not having this attachment to need to convert everyone to your way of seeing things. I am very, very passionate, and but ultimately I think where you and I agree is that I don't need anybody to believe what I believe. In fact, we're living in a time where we're not going to change really anybody's minds, like you're saying. Um, but did that have some kind of bearing on some of the work that you ended up doing in terms of like conjuration? I don't know how much you want to talk about this particular stuff, so I'm going to follow your lead here.
Uh, are you? There's a really great story that comes from 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
Uh, so here's the thing. I used to present quite a bit on topics. I gave a number of talks at Introduction to Hermetic Kabbalah for Freemasons. Apparently, that was very controversial, um, because I was rending the veil on what is the secret teaching, and I had no idea, you know. And I did give people the caveat. It's just like, look, this is all experiential. This is based on a long tradition that is, largely lifted and appropriated. And, here's how my practice affects it. Anyway, I used to present a lot. And then around 2015, friends of mine who have a podcast in the Los Angeles area at the time, they've now moved on to Arizona, and they were going to be about a year before I offered that they were talking about their episode 666. So for a year they had done their show every day, and then for the last 13 years they've been doing it every week. And so uh one of the show members gave me the title Troy the Devil Man. And I had called into the show and I had talked to these guys and I'd offered to come and summon a demon in a group ritual for the listeners and for the podcast. And so I traveled to LA. When I landed, it was 114 degrees in June. This was, I think, around the the summer solstice in 2016. But I'd have to double check the dates. But that's about when it was. And there was a heat wave in LA, and there were fires in every direction. And the show hosts, one of them was a Catholic, one of them it's not affiliated, but he really played up the whole Troy the Devil Man aspect and how devilly this would be and how transgressive it would be. It very much was reminiscent of Crowley, and I played along, and it was fun. And they did a live show where many of the participants of the live show came up and spoke, and it was like a 5-hour podcast. It's behind a paywall, but if people are really, really interested, I can get people the segment of my stuff that they could listen to, or you could just go pay the Gary and Dito show to go listen, because they deserve it, because they work hard. Anyway, so we're in LA for a few days. It was 114 degrees when I landed. It was 117 degrees when I left. The middle of the night when we did this ritual in an old, it was right beside at the time, Tom Likas had a studio in Burbank. It was in the space that was an old decommissioned laundromat next door. And there was all this old machinery around, and there was like 40 of us in there. And it was like 2 a.m, and I finally got started, and I did a banishing, pentagram ritual. And then I did, read some of the summoning for this particular entity out of Peterson's Lesser Key of Solomon, which was not what I would use for my own personal ritual. I'd been shown and been given other materials, but I thought that was okay because I wasn't using my own secret materials. I'm using published. Anybody could get Peterson's Lesser Key. Just go get it, and use whatever version of the ritual you want. And in so doing, in this little subculture, I kind of became this legend for doing the work, this particular work. There was a number of people who couldn't take it. Everybody had been drinking, so it's magic, hardcore magic, like summoning of lesser spirits out of the Goetia. Some people didn't react. Some people couldn't handle it. They had to leave. Other people had physical responses. We did get some sort of physical manifestation in one of the mediums that was there. He was sort of getting some vibes. And that was the height of my sort of public performance of this sort of work. And since then, my own spiritual work has been much more internal, much more for me,
Mhm.
and less showy for the public.
Mm.
But I still enjoy the epithet Troy the Devil Man. I very much enjoy the idea of it. And I still interact with the Gary and Dino show, and I enjoy very much what they offer, even though you have to pay for it. So many people are used to podcasts that are free. I mean, these guys, I think episode 1071 was just released. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, they're
Yeah, I've done
they're
like
still at it.
40 and I'm exhausted.
And so we did a follow-up episode about a year later where my wife and I went to the studio. It was right before they wound up operating out of this particular studio. And we recorded the longest show in Gary and Dino show history, and it was over 7 hours. Nina and I were only on it for like less than an hour. I mean, these guys do popular culture and drinking and stupidity. I mean, it couldn't even tell you what the show is about. Even after 1,000 shows, couldn't tell you.
When you
So,
say that some people in the audience couldn't take it, what do you mean? Was it like offensive?
yeah. So some people were it's not like anybody was a serious hardcore Christian and couldn't take it. Some people have been brought and were lapsed Christians and were like, I don't want to be reminded of this stuff. Never mind the transgressive nature of it. And in so doing, I realize how difficult that people were warned. They were there of their own free will. It's not like I sprung this on them, but I think people were expecting it to be more like show business than actual practice. Right? They weren't expecting somebody to be waving their hands around and chanting Hebrew at the walls.
And a
They
top hat.
right. Well, I had robes on, so I wore white robes, and I did have a circle of art. I did take proper precautions. I didn't invoke. I evoked, but into a space in in a triangle of art with a proper crystal. It was. I took the people like, oh, that's so dangerous. Like, well, I did take, a level of precaution. No, I very much enjoyed it, and I enjoy telling the story. I don't know if I've ever told the full story. Maybe this is the first time I've told the story online
That's great. That's great.
with
Yeah, I mean,
details
what a
and
story.
names. With details and names, yeah. But since then, like people are like, well, why wouldn't you do that again? Well, maybe I would do it again. I'd consider it, but to me that was I was developing in a certain direction, and now I'm developing in a different direction. How about that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important. But the idea of these things kind of being demonstrable is, I think, important in magic. I think that's something that I think I see more people coming around to that and not, sometimes I can be a little gun shy. I've got a lot of experience in magic, but I'm not the most intrepid. That undoubtedly comes from my Catholic upbringing, but I still, I kind of take it. I go the next step when I feel that I'm ready. But I find a lot of people in the magic circles, and I don't know if this is your experience. I mean, we live in very different places. This the Americas, it's a continent. Like, so we live on
Yeah,
the opposite ends
yeah, yeah.
like this. But I've seen people that kind of they love, and forgive me, but they love the foreplay, but nobody wants to fuck.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, here's the thing that and people are constantly asking me because I do run a lot of esoteric events. I've had Lon Duquette here. I don't know how many times, and I've had Richard Kaczynski here to Perturabo book launch, and then all this. We've done so many different esoteric speakers, practitioners, and academics too. Brought them here, and people are like, "Well, clearly you're the nexus." They're like, "Well, I want to learn this stuff. How do you learn it?" It's like, go keep a journal for a year and come back. And I've successfully avoided taking on students by asking people to do that. just the basics of what would look like an AA practice.
Is that intentional? Is that intentional? Like the way like Ringo Starr avoided being asked to play on records by making like $2 million a track, or
yeah, right. So because it's the imposter syndrome. Like, I don't feel like I've got anything to teach. And what I have to teach, I learned on my own, essentially. I got a lot of people showed me things, little things, and I studied under certain people, but never as a formal arrangement. And so, what I do is good enough for me. And so, I can't even remember what the original question was, but I just, I've been keeping people from being my direct students because I don't want that. But I can point people in the right direction, and I will often, field questions, and I'm happy to field questions. People will message me, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And I just, all the hard work, all the important work, um, is done on your own.
yeah,
And I think so much of the group work and ritual work is all preparatory for your own sort of work,
yeah,
if I can say so. And it's also subjective anyway. And then people are like, yeah, but when you know. And it's like, yes, you do know. You absolutely know when you're getting spiritual revelation or when you're attaining something. You absolutely know. And that's for you.
yes,
And language fails it. The Gnostics were right. You just can't, and the Rosicrucians too. You just can't talk about it. You have to be a warrior poet to be able to even attempt to put it into words. So I just, I keep that for myself. And is that selfish? Maybe. This is my incarnation to do with as I wish. The higher aspects of myself that move on are going to leave all that ego behind anyway. So, so what was the question again?
just a kind of a broad survey of, well, I guess my really what I was trying to lead into is, which I think that you alluded to somewhat in discussing, your personal approach to having students and things like that. Which I agree with you 110%. Like, I'll teach somebody how to read the Platonic dialogues. I'll even teach them energy work, but you can't teach somebody that level of magic. It has to happen over a really long period of time and practice. And there's certain things that they need to develop, internal markers or methods of measurement. Because I think one of the craziest things is, yes, absolutely, you're going to have a gnosis and you're going to have things, whatever you want to call it, as cliche as it sounds. You'll have downloads, you'll have, a guide to tell you something. But that's, yeah, like you're saying, that's for you.
The,
You're
the,
not going
the,
to
the
go right
listener
up.
can't the listener can't see me, but I'm nodding my head vigorously.
Right. Yeah. It's like one of the most egregious things, I think, is this widespread idea that everybody has this personal revelation that they have to commit to writing or an order, that happened after the Theosophical movement, because it's kind of what Blavatsky did. It's like the exemplar of that, and these ascended, teachers that she channeled and taught her. And then when she died and a couple of new people, Leadbeater and Besant, stepped up to bat, they just claimed the same thing. Oh, well, we've got our own chiefs, and you just see that kind of happen down the line, and everybody feeling like this really, really strong sense of personal gnosis, which is a good thing, but it's not great when you try and impose that on the rest of the world. So I agree
Yeah.
with you there, and that's kind of something that I saw at the start of, stepping out into the public and doing what I do. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, whether or not you're plugged in with the broader occult communities. What kind of changes are you noticing? What's the zeitgeist you're seeing in your neck of the woods in terms of a culture?
Well, certainly a broader interest. I saw what happened during the pandemic with the rise of witch talk and the different social media, efforts that people were making. And despite, I've never been interested in, in being a thought leader there. That's just not what I'm for. A popularizer or an event coordinator, a facilitator of events is what I've always seen myself as being. And it does make me a bit scared seeing sort of the political movement sort of globally, and I've become less obvious about what I believe is a link between Freemasonry and esotericism, because there are places on Earth, maybe even as important and diverse as India, where the people in power there could use things that I say about the craft to persecute members there that aren't towing the line. And I am acutely aware of the privilege I have sitting in Canada and being a kind of a rich white guy, being able to say shit like that, even just say the words out loud, right? When so many people, population wise, on the planet are just absolutely suppressed. But what I do see, in local culture is, Freemasonry is vibrant here. Still somewhat shrinking. I think we've reached a plateau here, but we've got some new buildings here that are absolutely beautiful. We got people who care about the craft and dedicate so much of the good stuff in their lives, their academic pursuit, their personal study, their spiritual pursuit, that are in sort of my age group and younger, that are going to take this thing and run with it. And same within the occult orders. They're all the organized ones that I am aware of and participate with, membership or not. They are naturally small, and I wouldn't say ineffective. They're effective in the lives of the people that they touch, but it's meant to be that way. The few in secret. I have a real distrust of the use of religion to influence people for political ends. And so, I'm kind of the sworn enemy of any sort of religious orthodoxy, because I think if you look historically, so much harm has been done by people who claim to speak for their invisible friend, that those of us who are interested in true freedom need to be aware that there are those forces working to put people in a box, like a belief structure, and those forces are on the rise kind of globally. And so, does magic work? Yes. Can we stop the outward manifestation of that magic as it runs in cycles, the systole and diastole of life? I'm uncertain. I am uncertain, and I'm afraid for people in places that might be persecuted like that. Part of that, part of why I spoke on Sapere Autere was to, out myself. Here's a Freemason interested in Crowley, but that has, it's manifested some people who really dislike that, and so, again, I'm not gonna honor any particular people with belief structures that they believe are diametrically opposed to what I practice. That's their problem. It's not my problem.
Yeah.
You know.
It's several interesting considerations. You don't really hear of too many people that, I mean, this is the first time I've ever heard anybody say that they're they have a concern about, what they're putting out there into the public ethers, because, and acknowledging that there is a real physical danger to life and
Mm.
limb and personal freedom in other places of the world.
Oh,
I think
sure.
that's an incredible thought to have.
Yeah, and I try not to let it, you know, uh, bother me all the time, but it certainly it changes the lens through which I will project things outward in future. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I look, it can never hurt. And I personally don't believe it's opposed. I think it's right in line with Freemasonic tenets to really curate your speech. So I have a great deal of respect for that. So you've got I guess your main thing, your main podcast you're working on right now is the Mystic Tye, correct? You just had brother or Dr. Nathan Schick on, who's a friend and a Tria Prima guy
Yeah.
and very sharp guy. Love talking to him. So what have you got going on in that neck of the woods? What's the spirit of that project?
So the idea with the Mystic Tye, this is exactly with what I was just talking about. The idea that I don't want to be putting out content that I'm technically legally allowed to produce here and say whatever I want, that somebody on the other side of the world, that's one of the members of the 6 or 8 million Freemasons that exist, living somewhere where somebody's like, what they do over there is sorcery. We should tie him to a stick and set him on fire. So the idea with the Mystic Tye is to still talk about esotericism, popular esotericism, and Freemasonry, but more with an eye to entertainment rather than sort of hardcore occultism, and to bring guests on that might also have some esoteric belief or interest. But I also want to bring on guys that are in the completely exoteric world of bricks and mortar Freemasonry or knife and fork Freemasonry. They want to talk about why they became a Mason, or why their shrine event is worth talking about, or why guys should join this organization or that organization. I'm absolutely open to it. The idea is to get people's experience of Freemasonry into the public milieu, because that is not, it's when it's done in a contrived manner. It's here we're looking to reverse the shrinking of the organization, and we're right sizing, in so many jurisdictions. In lots of places we're growing, but in lots of other places it's shrinking. And there's a panic, in some places where they got to reverse that shrinking, and that's, no amount. It's just a natural right sizing, I think. But I think the best way for Freemasons to communicate with other people who might be interested in the craft is just to talk about their experience of the craft. And so much more of the experience of the craft is going to events like Grand Masonic Day, where there might be one presentation that's esoterically leaning. I had Greg Kaminsky a couple of years ago give a talk about Mirandula and his book that he published. Okay, but the whole rest of the day was not that. It was one talk, right? And so most of Freemasonry is the rest of the stuff. How do we manage our buildings? How do we manage our committees? How do we put our degrees together? And how can we make not just the candidate's experience a superior experience, but make the lodge experience for everybody a premium experience? And so, I have a lot of sympathy with the traditional observance movement, and I appreciate that it's not, I don't think it's trying to make sort of an exclusive type of Freemasonry. That's not what it's about. It's about people who choose to meet together in our private club to have the best possible experience of that Freemasonry. And if you're a ritually focused lodge, great. If you're a dining focused lodge, great. If you're an events focused lodge, great. If you are a charity focused lodge, that all those things are incredible. And I want to talk to more Freemasons. Now, it just so happens that because I'm the host and I'm putting this project together, the Mystic Tye, the first few interviews have been more, maybe esoterically leaning. I had Wes Regan on to talk about attacks against Masonic buildings, because he's doing some PhD research on that. And then I had Dr. Nathan Schick on to talk about the Grand Communication, because I have an interest in Masonic books, and I'm going to try to get every Masonic author publishing a book on the podcast. That's the goal. And to have all these book listings where people can go buy these books, because so much of Masonic culture going forward, especially globally, is print culture, is what we put in our books and what the thoughts we put in our books. Because again, so much of it is subjective. Guys putting their ideas down in books, it's a very important part of the culture going forward. And I want to encourage guys to read, because, most people don't read enough. I think Freemasons read more than most, but still, people could read more, and it may sound what's the word I'm looking for? It may sound anachronistic that we need to read more.
Good word.
Already using antiquarian language, right, or anachronistic language in our ritual. And I'm one of those guys that wants more, not less, because it sticks better. But I just think, reading and studying, especially new thoughts, not new thought, but new thoughts put forward by Freemasons, like P.D. Newman's book, like Dr. Nathan Schick's books, like Jamie Paul Lamb's book, and your book. Like, this is important that people who think they have something to say put it forward in a book. That may stand the test of time, or we may all be laughing at each other 25 years from now. You remember when you put that out there. But somebody's got to put that out there, right? Somebody's got to make this stuff. And that's, again, the Mystic Tye is about, it's a podcast for Freemasons. And we may talk about some esoteric stuff, and we've been talking about more esotericism already than I wanted to. But again, I want to cover all bases and get anything tangentially Freemasonic, especially conferences, kind of listed. Not the Conference of Grandmasters. Everybody knows when that is. But these regional conferences, Esotericon, Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference, Grand Masonic Day. And you're going to a regional one at the beginning of June, right? Like a regional the Masonic conference you guys are doing. I want to get a listing of that stuff, because there are, especially members of the public, that don't even know where to go. And we don't have any outreach. And these are our future members. Again, I just start talking and then I forget what the question was.
Well, I think you covered a lot of ground in terms of the spirit of the Mystic Tye,
Sure.
and the thing as a podcast, you definitely hit the bullseye on that. But you'd asked me a question about what I could offer in terms of people that are interested in Freemasonry and joining. And I want to put a question to you. So you could answer this in two ways, right? You could tackle both. So I want to bring that question back on you. What would you say to people that are interested in getting involved in Freemasonry right now? But also, I'm interested in what advice you might have to people who cannot join the fraternity, and for one reason or another, whether that's because they're not of lawful age yet, or because they're they're female, or what have you, or simply will not. What could you recommend to them in terms of understanding the fraternity a little better? We're talking about public outreach here and things like that. There's a lot of misconception out there, and what have you found to be somewhat reliable of a resource in terms of being able to peer through the veil a little bit from the outside? What would you say to either of those people?
Well, I mean, if you can join, you should join. If you're remotely interested, because the sad thing about the craft, for recruiting in the craft, first of all, we're not going to ask. Nobody's out there asking anybody. You got to ask us. You got to find us. You got to find 3 guys that are going to stand up for you, or a couple guys to sign your paperwork, and then 3 guys are going to come investigate you. You got to find a lodge that'll have you. And that isn't always easy, right? Especially for guys that are of an alternative bent. If you've got things in your life that are outstanding, if you're not established yet, it can be harder to join the craft if you don't know members in the craft. And that's for practical reasons. We don't want to let in people we don't know well. We don't want to let in criminals or people who mean us harm. There's been a few rending of the veils recently. Even, in our close circle of friends, we know people that have had candidates come in with ill will to expose the fraternity. And I can tell you from the inside that if there was some sort of global conspiracy, it would have presented itself by now. That's the biggest conspiracy is that there are forces aligned against the craft that seem to want to tell people, oh, you got to wait to be invited, or there's something nefarious over there. There isn't. If you can join. And people will be like, well, shouldn't they find a good lodge? Yes. If you live in a big city, first just reach out to your network. Just post on Facebook, hey, I'm interested in joining the fraternity. Is anybody I know is a Freemason? Somebody in your friends list will know, and then, take it offline if you want to keep that to yourself. But that's one way of finding a Freemason. Just find somebody who you know and somebody who might vouch for you. That would be helpful. And yes, you should maybe explore a few lodges if you can, but I think it's more important to join. And if you find that the lodge brothers that you're sitting in lodge with aren't to your taste, or there's something going on that doesn't, first of all, that's a learning experience. You should find out why it isn't working for you. Often it's you. You can't point at the guys and say, well, there's this problem, there's that problem. It's time to grow. That's what the craft is for. It's the first human potential movement. It's the first cult of self-improvement. We say we make good men better. How do we do that? Well, we make you do stuff, and a lot of that stuff, it requires a little bit of growth, and if you can't find yourself getting along and it affects your Pax Templi, then that's the time to start shopping. Don't quit. Find other guys and other lodges as you visit that you could go out and spend time with and use that. It's better to join and then move than not join. Or, and if you're getting rejected, find out why you're getting rejected. It's hard for guys to tell you that, but perhaps your sponsors might be able to give you some guides, and lots of times people will just not ever hear again. And it's sad, but now if you don't have multiple lodges to choose from and you're living in a small town, guys are just anxious to have younger people involved. Just go get involved, and if it doesn't seem to your taste, or if you find them bigoted, or if you find them a problem, again, ask yourself, why is that a problem for you? Why is it surrounding yourself with people with diverse interests, religious backgrounds, spiritual opinions, political opinions? Even though we're not supposed to express those, sometimes around the festive board, you hear bigoted language or whatnot. Freemasons are still people. And you should ask yourself, why is that a problem for you? Try and improve the world by being the best example of yourself. So that's some other advice. Now, and I think it's worth driving half hour to the next town if you don't have a Freemasonic lodge in your town. And it's really not that big a commitment. The other thing that's sad right now is a lot of lodges have very low membership. And when you get involved, then you got to be an officer right away. Don't let yourself get pressured. That I think is a real shame. But I wasn't ready. I got press ganged into being the junior deacon, then jump senior deacon, junior warden, senior warden, master. I was not ready to be master, but I learned real quick how to be master, and it made me a better person. So even if you don't think you're ready, go take on the thing that scares you and be ready. So there's that. Now, if you're a woman, or you're underage, or you think you wouldn't be able to join for this reason or that reason, you might be surprised. There are organizations that are co-Masonic. There's a number of co-Masonic Grand Lodges in North America and all over Europe. There's also women Freemasons in a number of traditions, including in the French tradition and the English tradition. They're harder to get, but you can still find them. Go to open events that are Masonic or events like this. Search the internet. You're able to find them. At some point, I'll have a directory put up for that. If you need a contact, just contact somebody to do with the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference, myself or Ken Lane, and we'll put you in contact with the right people. Again, it's not regular, capital R, regular, capital F, Freemasonry, but the fraternity is such that in the small F Freemasonry, we are all brothers of the dust. And so I would encourage women who are interested to join and get involved. There's lots of regular Freemasonic female bodies, but they tend to insist that you have some sort of male relative. But I don't know if that's true, if that's still the case anymore. It may or may not be the case. But there's lots of other stuff to join. Golden Dawn bodies or women and men together. OTO lodges will take women and men, just make sure you ask the right questions of the people, and just defend yourself, guard yourself from getting undue influence. If you find, because there's 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 bad people in every organization. There's many more good people though than there is the bad people. At least that's what I've found.
Yeah, here, here. That's excellent advice. So, as you know, when we get to the end of the podcast, I've got a canned question I ask everybody
Ooh.
for anyone that's listened to this podcast today. And we as usual we cover a lot of ground. We talk Crowley, we talk Golden Dawn, OTO, Freemasonry, conjuration, all sorts of cool stuff.
Mm.
Um, for anybody that's interested, uh, please list 3 books that you would recommend to them if they wanted to learn a little bit more. It can be about really any area that we talked about today.
I if people are open to the idea of Crowley, start with, I mean, Kaczynski's Perturabo is genius, and it gives people a better idea of the man, the man who was a person and quite an asshole, and the genius holy man that really did have his finger on the spiritual pulse of his own will. I can't recommend that book enough. And also, I'm going to recommend 4 books, and then Book of Lies, I think, is the height of 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 Crowley's mysticism. If you find that completely impenetrable, good for you, because so do I. So often do I, even after 20 years with the material. Excuse me. Um, I really like the material that Lon Duquette puts out, and I've been friends with Lon for many years, and I've heard all the criticism that doesn't take it seriously or doesn't know what he's doing or whatever. It's all, to me, that's just armchair uber maguses that have a problem. I like Lon's popularizing approach. I think the Chicken Kabbalah is probably the best book on the subject produced today, and it's still in print, and you can always get it. Go and get yourself a Chicken Kabbalah and have a chuckle with Rabbi Lamed Ben Clifford. An excellent work. Oh, I I tell you what book I really did enjoy
Mhm.
was was it Tobias Churton's Magus of Freemasonry about Elias Ashmole?
I believe so.
That Churton's work is always like, he puts enough detail in without getting. You want to compare Crowley biographies done by Churton compared to Kaczynski's work? Well, Kaczynski's work is like 900 pages and will hold down your. You don't need um you don't need a, a bookend, because it is a bookend. Like, it's huge. But any of the work by Churton, it's more breezy. It's easier to read. It's not that it's less scholarly. It's just it's written in a different manner. It's meant to be approachable. And I think of Churton's works, and I think I've got them all now. I still think the Magus of Freemasonry is my favorite.
Wow.
And
That's I mean, that's a bold statement. Tobias Churton he's one of the most well-researched scholars on this stuff in the world.
yeah, and I like his material. And that particular book, the book, the book about Cagliostro. What was that? Egyptian Freemasonry. What was that?
I think the Egyptian Freemason was the name of
Yeah,
yeah,
about
that's a great
Cagliostro.
book too.
What a good prelude to P.D. Newman's Alchemically Stoned, and then Angels in Vermilion, because I really believe there was a time where a bitter draught or uh, entheogenic drinks were a part of initiation. And I
Mhm,
think that would go back to the rites of Eleusis.
mhm.
Now, there's no proof, and I'm not one for entheogens. Everybody knows I'm damn near a teetotaler, but I would support the use of entheogens if people could get more authentic with themselves, and also not do any cultural damage by consuming things. Keep it keep it tested and synthetic, and have a guide and that sort of stuff.
Great. Troy Spreeuw, thank you so much, brother. It's wonderful speaking with you. It's humbling speaking with you. It's really I'm glad that we were introduced. I'm glad that we met, and I'm looking forward to the conference and everything else that you've got in the future. Um, where can people hear more about the podcast and the event?
I'm easy to find online. It's at mystictye.com. That's mystictye.com. So
Mm,
it's Mystic Tye podcast. And then the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference lives on the internet at esotericmasonry.com,
great.
just like it sounds. And I believe the both of those should be easy to track down on Google. If I may, one more quick book shout out. Now this is
Yes.
six books. Martin Starr recently with Oxford's Esotericism imprint that's um, uh, what would that title be? Henrik Bogdan has been working with OUP to put out all these occult imprints, all these occult books, and one of the latest was a reprint of Martin Starr's The Unknown God. And if you have any interest in Crowley OTO or in the occult history of Vancouver and the west coast of North America, get The Unknown God. Pay what it's worth. When Martin originally published, like I think 1,000 or 1,700 copies, they used to sell for thousands of dollars until this reprint came out. Go and get a reprint and read it because it'll give you an idea of what it's like to live in magical community. It's like a biography of Wilfred Talbot Smith and his experience with Frater Akkad and Crowley and the OTO people at Agape Lodge. And Jack Parsons, of all people, makes an appearance. So does L. Ron Hubbard. Anyway, yeah, no, people could find me at the Mystic Tye and esotericmasonry.com. If you're in or coming to the Vancouver area, reach out to me personally. If I find you worthy, I will take you on what I call tongue in cheek the Vancouver Occult Tour, and you get to see Akkad's grave. You get to see where all the OTO lodges were first opened in 1915. Before they closed them and ran, and I'll show you the different parts of the city where the Theosophy had like 7 active lodges here at one time. Amwork had a temple with 500 people in
Wow.
the 70s. Yeah, yeah. So there's lots going on here, and I would happily take people on a drive around to show them what's going on. And yeah, please come to Grand Masonic Day, May 25th, if you're in the area. And if you're in the Seattle area, Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference, September 27th to 29th. And you'll get to see Brother Ike Baker speaking at that, no less.
Yes, I will see you there. Thanks for coming on, brother.
Thank you for having me, Ike. This was a pleasure.